All right, everybody, welcome back. You know what time? It is time for another deep dive.
And this time, we're diving headfirst into the world of risk management.
We've got some seriously interesting material to unpack today.
Oh, absolutely.
Engineer Omar Samanego's guidelines on prefabricated concrete beams.
This is fascinating stuff.
I know, right? Might sound a little dry at first. We're talking concrete beams after all, but trust me on this one.
Oh, it's anything but.
The insights here apply whether you're building bridges or just, navigating everyday life.
Exactly. And Samaniego really hits on something crucial right off the bat. The difference between controllable and uncontrollable risks.
Okay, so for our listeners who might not be familiar with that distinction, break it down for us.
Sure. It's all about understanding what you can influence and what you can't. Samaniego uses a really straightforward example, rain.
Okay, I can see where this is going.
When you're talking about something like construction, rain, in itself, that's an uncontrollable risk, right? You can't control the weather.
Right, unless you're some sort of
supervillain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you can control how you prepare for it.
Right, and that's the key.
Yeah.
Having protocols in place. Samaniego talks about requiring rain protection during concrete pouring. Now that becomes a controllable risk.
So it's not about trying to eliminate every single risk, which is impossible. It's about
minimizing the impact.
Exactly.
Of those things you can't control by focusing on the things that you can.
Which, that makes perfect sense when you think about it.
Absolutely. And what I find really interesting is that Samaniego doesn't just stop at addressing the causes of risks. He also emphasizes addressing the effects.
Right, so you don't want to just react to problems. You want to
anticipate them.
Exactly.
And have a plan.
Speaking of planning, there's something in Samaniego's guidelines that caught my eye, and I'm curious to get your take on it. He uses the term likelihood pretty consistently instead of probability.
Interesting.
And now, to most people listening, those might seem interchangeable, but in this context, I feel like there's a reason for that distinction. What do you think?
I think you're on to something. And you're right, it's not just semantics, especially in this context. When we talk about probability, it often implies something that can be calculated with a certain degree of...
Sure.
Exactly. But likelihood acknowledges the fact that in a lot of real-world scenarios, especially in fields like engineering or project management, you're dealing with expert opinions, estimations, and a degree of uncertainty.
It's a bit more nuanced. It factors in the human element.
Precisely.
Because we can't predict the future.
If we could, well...
we wouldn't need risk management.
Exactly. And that's something important to keep in mind, I think, throughout this whole deep dive, is that as much as we plan for every possibility, unexpected things, they happen.
They always do.
Being able to adapt and adjust is just as crucial as having that initial plan.
And that takes us right to this example that Samaniego talks about.
Oh, yeah.
Which really brings this whole idea home.
It's a good one.
It shows how even something that seems like a small hiccup can actually snowball into this huge issue.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
He uses this example of a prefabrication plant where these concrete beams are made.
Okay.
And he talks about their capacity to handle like these sudden spikes in demand.
Right. Because this is such a good example, and it gets to that interconnectedness of everything. Because it might seem like, okay, if a prefabrication plant has a capacity issue, that's their problem, right?
Right.
But it actually illustrates how even what seems like a minor operational detail can cascade throughout the entire project, impacting the timeline, the budget.
Right. It's like that domino effect.
Exactly.
You tip that first domino and then suddenly...
it else falls apart. So you can think of it this way. Let's say that this prefab plant suddenly gets swamped with orders way beyond what they're used to handling.
Okay, so they're in over their heads.
Completely. So what happens? You got bottlenecks in production.
Makes sense.
Deliveries get delayed. And suddenly, everyone's scrambling.
And I'm guessing this doesn't just impact that one plant, right?
Oh, absolutely not. It ripples outward. It can even impact things like the availability of skilled labor. The price of raw materials might go up because of the demand.
Wow.
And we haven't even gotten to the project itself yet. Construction timelines, they get thrown off.
Oh, I'm sure.
Which, as we know, leads to delays, cost overruns, and probably a whole lot of stress for everyone involved.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah. And it's a good example of how, even with something like a bridge, you often don't think about all these interconnected elements.
You just see the bridge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You don't think about what went into making it.
Right. And that's why this proactive approach to risk management is so important, because if you just wait until there's a problem, it might be too late.
Right.
So how do you actually, how do you go about mitigating a risk like that? I mean, you can't just snap your fingers and make a plant bigger overnight.
Right, so what do you do?
Well, that's where planning comes in. Samaniego, he stresses the importance of clear, constant communication with your suppliers, having those contingency plans in place,
Okay.
and constantly monitoring the situation so you can adapt as needed. Because, you said it yourself, you can't just magically make those problems disappear,
Right.
but you can be prepared to deal with them.
Yeah. So it seems like effective risk management is about more than just having a plan. It's also about building strong relationships, communication channels.
Oh, absolutely. Because let's face it, even with the best laid plans, sometimes the unexpected happens.
Right.
And that kind of leads us to another really important point that Samaniego makes, which is this often overlooked difference between just checking boxes and actually actively monitoring those potential risks.
Yeah, it's like we've all been there, right?
Yeah.
Staring at that to-do list, just checking things off.
Tell me about it.
But not really, absorbing what those tasks actually mean or what it takes to actually check them off, right?
Right.
So when it comes to this whole idea of risk management, how do we actually go beyond just checking the box?
Well, this is where Samaniego makes a really, really important distinction between what he calls reporting and updating.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Reporting versus updating.
So think of reporting as that snapshot in time. It's like, here's where things stand at this particular moment.
Right.
Which, of course, that's important for documentation, for having that big picture overview. But updating, that's where the real magic happens. That's about constantly monitoring for those subtle shifts, those early warning signs.
Okay, so reporting is looking back, updating is looking ahead.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. And I think this is something that's relevant to all of us.
Oh, absolutely.
Not just project managers. Because how often do we get caught off guard by something and we think, oh, I should have seen that coming?
All the time. All the time. If only we had a crystal ball.
Right.
But this whole idea of updating, it's all about being proactive.
Absolutely. And Samaniego, he tells this really interesting story about this prefabrication plant. And everything seems to be going smoothly, but then out of nowhere, they lose their lease.
Oh, no.
And it just goes to show that even when you think you've got everything under control, something unexpected can happen. And that's why this constant vigilance is so crucial.
So risk management is not a one-and-done thing.
It's ongoing.
It's a process.
Yes.
And it's about adapting to those changing circumstances.
Yeah.
It's like you're always on your toes.
And it's everybody's job, too, by the way.
What do you mean?
I mean, we tend to think of risk management as this thing that, project managers do or engineers do. But in reality, we all manage risks every single day, whether we realize it or not.
True.
Every decision we make,
Right.
every action we take. It's all about assessing and managing potential risks.
So I guess the takeaway here is to stay curious, stay informed.
Absolutely.
And don't get lulled into that false sense of security just because things are, good in this moment.
Because yesterday's problem can very easily become tomorrow's problem if you're not paying attention. And Samaniego leaves us with this really thought-provoking question, which is, how often do we get so caught up in our own little bubbles that we miss those crucial connections, those wider trends, whether it's at work or in our personal lives? And that's something I've been thinking about a lot, because these principles of risk management, clear communication, proactive planning, constant awareness, those are valuable tools no matter what you do.
No matter what you do. Such a good point to end on. There you have it, Deep Divers. A glimpse into the fascinating world of risk management.
Who knew it could be so interesting?
And how its principles can apply to pretty much every aspect of our lives. So, until next time.
Stay vigilant.
And remember, a little bit of awareness and foresight goes a long way.